Welcome back to Indiana at the voice of college football. And we have a big show for you guys tonight talking about the Indiana football Hoosiers. In Indiana, this has been, the most historic season in Indiana football history by far. I mean, everybody is just so blown away at, how well they have done. And I think when you look at the fact that, you know, this season for Indiana, being 11-2. Nobody would have ever expected them to do this well. I'm still blown away. I mean, we're talking about Indiana football making the first ever 12-team college football playoff. I know that's not as big of a deal as the 4-team playoff, but still, at the beginning of the season, nobody was even expecting Indiana to make a bowl game. I had them going 7-5. They ended up making the playoffs and losing to the two teams that ended up somehow making the national title game. Ohio State, Notre Dame. Those were Indiana's only losses. And to me, that further validates how good of a team Indiana was. I know their schedule wasn't that strong, but when you lose to the two teams that ended up making the national title game, and Ohio State ended up winning it all, but Indiana losing to those two teams, they had a really good season, an elite season for Indiana standards. And for most, great programs, this would just be a good season. But it's for Indiana. This is the best season they've ever had, unless you want to count the Rose Bowl season in 1945 or 1967. But I think in the entire context of Indiana football, I would say that this was the best season of Indiana football of all time because they won the most games ever, winning 11 games, and they made the college football playoff to have a chance to win a national championship, something they didn't have in those 1945 and 1967 seasons. So just such a big deal for Indiana football, and just still so excited to talk about it, even though the college football season is over and we have crowned a national champion with the Ohio State Buckeyes for this season. To me, looking at in the Indiana picture, I mean, this was just such a monumental season for the program, and definitely shows that in this NIL era, Indiana is coming to play with a new head coach in Curt Cignetti after his first year doing what he just did. And now we're moving on to year two, and people are excited about the future for Indiana football for essentially the first time in a long time, and for some people ever. But I have to say that one question I want to ask for this show, Indiana Hoosiers Live 15, definitely appreciate if you guys are new to the show. Definitely subscribe down below if you're an Indiana fan, or even if you're not an Indiana fan. Definitely would appreciate your support if you are enjoying the show. Like the stream down below, and definitely follow the Voice of College Football on Twitter, where you will find updates for this show and all the other team channels on the Voice of College Football Network. Definitely a lot of great shows to check out. But for Indiana, we have to talk about, is Curt Cignetti already the best Indiana football coach in history? And I think this is very important, because when you look at the fact that Curt Cignetti got Indiana in year one to their best season ever in the record books, winning 10 games for the first time ever, winning 11 games for the first time ever. And like I said, giving Indiana, even though they lost to Notre Dame in round one of the college football playoff, this was Indiana's first chance in football history to ever win a national championship. They didn't do that, but that's special. That is huge. It is so hard to say this. It is so hard to say this because you don't know what's going to happen in the future. Yes, Indiana could somehow next year and beyond just tank. It could fall off the rails. Kind of like you could say, Edo at LSU. That's a different situation. But like after their national championship season, they just fell off. Or even look at TCU. That's a better example with Sonny Dykes having a great year. Ever since then, have kind of struggled. Did a little bit better this past year. But that could happen for Indiana. And if it does, if Indiana doesn't even make a bowl game next year and it was just a one-year deal, would that make Curt Cignetti still the best coach in Indiana football history if the rest of his tenure doesn't go that well? Nowhere near as good as this season. They struggle to make bowl games, and just this was the lightning in a bottle year. Would that make him the best coach in history? Really, to be fair, the only coach that you could even, I guess you could say, compare him to would be either Bo McMillan in the 1940s or Bill Mallory in the 1980s/90s. Bill Mallory had the longevity factor going in his case because he coached Indiana football for 14 years, and he had a losing record, but he was the winningest coach in Indiana football history. See, Curt Cignetti doesn't have that label. See, if Curt Cignetti's at Indiana for the next 8, 9, 10 seasons and then retires, I would think Curt Cignetti would have a really good case to crack the record book of being the winningest coach in Indiana football history. But we don't know that yet. We don't even know if Curt Cignetti is going to stay, even though we think because of the contract extension and the fact that, he is older. I mean, maybe this is his final job. Hopefully for Indiana fans, it is his final job. And he has made it, pretty apparent that his wife likes it in Bloomington and that he likes it in Bloomington. So it is very likely, especially if Indiana keeps committing to football the way they are, that he'll stay. But until we know that, it's hard to say he's better than Bill Mallory. Now, Bill Mallory never had a season like this. I think the best season, if I recall, that he ever had at Indiana was a 9-4 year. He did go 9-4 once with Indiana when they had Anthony Thompson, Trent Green. Good team, very good team. But 9-4, that was it. And he also won 2 bowl games. Two of Indiana's 3 bowl wins in history were under Bill Mallory. So has Curt Cignetti won a bowl game yet? No. But what Bill Mallory doesn't have is a college football playoff appearance. The college football playoff didn't exist back then. But still, Bill Mallory never got Indiana to a point where they were competing for a national championship. Curt Cignetti did. So in that regard, Cignetti's already better than Bill Mallory. But like I said, Mallory has that longevity factor. He's got being the winningest coach ever. Then you look at Bo McMillin. He's the other candidate because Indiana won, they went to the Rose Bowl in 1945. And they won, I think, 9 games that season in 1945. What hurts Bo McMillin, though, is he didn't stay in Indiana very long. He did not accumulate tons of wins because he only stayed in Indiana for like 4 or 5 seasons. And then after that, he went off to the NFL. If Bo McMillin had stayed in Indiana longer and racked up a lot more wins, that would have really strengthened his case to be the best coach in Indiana history. Because for some people, he is the best coach in Indiana history. But a lot of people do point to Bill Mallory because he did it more in the modern era and he stayed in Indiana for a long time, won those 2 bowl games. But you can really kind of actually make the case that Bo McMillin is the best coach. Then you got John Pont. He took Indiana to the 67 Rose Bowl when they lost to O.J. Simpson and USC. The only problem is that other than that season, John Pont's tenure was not great. And then you look at Lee Corso, beloved Lee Corso. We love Lee Corso. Indiana fans especially do, but all college football fans because Lee Corso is such an icon. But his tenure at Indiana, it wasn't all that good. It was not, it was not historic in any way. He did win 1 bowl game. That's the one thing in his favor. He won 1 bowl game and had the classic screenshot of them being up 7-0 on Ohio State before getting obliterated. But Lee Corso is definitely not a candidate for the best coach in Indiana history. Definitely have to point him out, though. But other than that, I mean, you got Tom Allen, too, with Michael Penix. But Tom Allen never won any bowl games. Came close a few times, but never won any bowl games. Really blew that Tennessee one. And outside of a couple of good years, his tenure wasn't that great. But I think Curt Cignetti, you're stacking him up against Mallory, and you're stacking him up with Bo McMillin. And I think that Curt Cignetti definitely has a case to be the best Indiana football coach. Because, for one thing, how many records did McMillin and Mallory break at the time? They broke records. Indiana broke records. But did they ever break as many records as Curt Cignetti did in 1 year? Curt Cignetti broke so many records for IU. Most points in a game, most yards in a game, most wins in a season. I mean, so many records were broken. It's unbelievable. I mean, winning games by bigger amounts against teams they won in like 40 years. It's unreal. And like I said, making the college football playoff. I think the definitive answer to this question is that Curt Cignetti is definitely one of the top 3 best coaches in Indiana football history after 1 season. And I know that is sad. That shows you how poor Indiana's history is, and throughout the 126 seasons of Indiana football, they just lose. They have a 42% win percentage, basically equates to 4-8. Just not a good football program in any regard. 4-8, 5-7, somewhere in that range. Just not a good football program. But what Curt Cignetti did after 1 year, I think you can already basically slot him at number 3. But if he's at Indiana for over 5, 6, 7 years, and he takes them to more bowl games. Well, I can't even say more bowl games. I technically, the college football playoff is a bowl game. Those are bowl games. So, yes, he did. So, if he takes them to more bowl games, can somehow make the playoffs again, then Curt Cignetti will become the best Indiana football coach in history. It's not going to take much for that to occur. Nothing against McMillin and nothing against Bill Mallory. They're icons in their own right for Indiana. Not if they were in Alabama. If either of those coaches, Bill Mallory was at Alabama, he'd be the worst coach in Bama history, or one of the worst, which is insane. It just shows you the standards that Indiana have. They're just a lot lower. But I think, obviously, if Bill Mallory was at Alabama, he'd have won more games, more talent, all that. But Curt Cignetti, I mean, the fact that I'm already pitching this as a question early in this offseason, and I'll do this in the future, after next season and beyond, I revisit this question to ask if Curt Cignetti is the best Indiana football coach. I think he can become the best coach. I think he already has a massive case to be the best coach, but because he's only been there for 1 year and we don't know if it's going to completely tank, I'll say he's at number 3 right now behind McMillan and Mallory, but definitely has a massive case to be the best coach in Indiana history in the future if he keeps on winning. And I hope that happens for Indiana football. But after, all the positive talk with Curt Cignetti and all the hype, I've definitely hyped up Curt Cignetti almost for some people ad nauseum because, again, I'm just blown away with what he's done. It's been so impressive. But with that also comes now expectations. Indiana football is expected to actually be good again next year. And this is where I'm really intrigued because this was a once, in a lifetime season for Indiana football. And if it stays that way, if it does, people are going to remember it fondly for forever. Indiana fans will. But can you build upon it? Can you continue to be good? If that happens for Indiana, that would, like I said, absolutely cement Curt Cignetti's the best Indiana football coach. But it also would make Indiana an actual legit football program in the future. Now in the modern era, in the present day, like Indiana football, get rid of all that garbage past. Like all that losing, it's out the door. You are now a legitimate Big Ten program that can compete for, the Big Ten and actually have a legit shot to win the national title, even if it's not a big chance, but a small chance. And you see the top 25 way too early poll that ESPN has delivered. They do it right after the national championship. And you can see the early suspects. Ohio State going to be at number 1. That makes absolute sense after they won it all. Texas at 2. Penn State at 3. And keep in mind, Penn State, Indiana plays them next year on the road. So it's going to be a tougher schedule for Indiana next year. Going to be very interesting. Notre Dame at 4. Georgia at 5. Oregon 6. Clemson 7, LSU at number 8, BYU at 9, South Carolina at 10, Iowa State 11, Bama at 12, Illinois at 13. And the thing is, Indiana, they've got Oregon. They play Oregon as well on the road. It's going to be a very tough game. They have Penn State on the road. Illinois is at home, I believe. So that's already 3 teams in the top 25 Indiana has to play. They don't have to play Michigan, Ohio State, which is great, but they have to play these teams. It's going to be tough. Arizona State 14. SMU 15, K-State 16, and here it is, Indiana at number 17. And this is unreal. I mean, to think that Indiana is ranked in an early top 25 poll, and by all accounts, they are going to be ranked, barring anything crazy in spring practice going down where, it's going to lower expectations. Indiana will be ranked to start the 2025-2026 football season. And last time Indiana was ranked, we know what happened. They were ranked in the 2021 season after Michael Penix had the great 2020 year, almost beat Ohio State, but then he got hurt, lost Ole Miss in the bowl game. Another bowl game Indiana should have won. But 2021, they were ranked at number 21 against Iowa in week 1, and Indiana fans were hyped. I was hyped. I was like, wow, Indiana's ranked. Let's see what they can do. We know that season ended disastrously. They went 2-10. Michael Penix was never healthy. It is what it is. But the key is for Indiana this season, it's not about making the playoff again. Now, that would be awesome. I'm all for that. If Indiana can make the playoffs again, amazing. That would just be fantastic and just show what a job Cignetti is doing yet again, not a one-hit wonder. But I think the more important thing is that Indiana just needs to be good next year. They just need to be good. They don't have to be elite. If they're elite, great. I mean, if they are better than they were this past season, like I said, I'm all for it. But if they can just go 8-4, don't not fall back to 5-7, 4-8, or even 6-6. If they can just be 8-4 or 9-3, that would be even better. But 8-4 is like that cutoff line. 7-5, I would be fine with 7-5, considering who they play. They have at Iowa, they've got Illinois, they got Penn State, Oregon. I mean, 7-5. I think they have like Wisconsin, Michigan State, teams that could get better. 7-5 would be fine. But 8-4, if Indiana could go 8-4 and win your bowl game, go 9-4, get Indiana's first bowl win since 1991, and finish in the season ranked. I mean, like to start the season ranked and then finish the season ranked. it would show like, yes, Indiana met the expectations. They didn't exceed it like last year. I mean, they so far exceeded. They were expected to go 4-8, and they ended up going 11-2. But if they could just this season, just go out there and just play to, the new expectation for Indiana. This is it. This is a new expectation. I mean, you think about the fact that they're losing Curtis Rourke, Justice Ellison, Zach Horton, Mike Kadick at center, and tons of defensive players. CJ West, big loss, Jalen Walker. But look at those returning players. Elijah Surratt, Omar Cooper, Carter Smith, Aiden Fisher, D'Angelo Ponce, and Mikel Kamara. I cannot stress enough how important that is, because it would have been very difficult for Indiana to be able to replace as good of an edge guy as Mikel Kamara was this past season for Indiana. He's coming back for another year to try to boost his draft stock. I mean, his draft stock was already high. I'm really shocked he's coming back, but very glad that he is. And then you also look at the fact that Indiana is also bringing in Fernando Mendoza in the transfer portal, a quarterback that has upside, a quarterback that has draft potential. After what, Indiana did with Curtis Rourke this past season, a guy that looks like played with a partially torn ACL all season long, which was, disastrous, on paper now that we knew about it. But looking at the entire season, Rourke played through it and did a really good job. Couldn't really evade pressure, but he hung in there and made all the throws, and looks like he's going to get drafted. So, I mean, what Curt Cignetti and the coordinators did with him was amazing. Now you got Fernando Mendoza, a guy that was at Cal with a terrible offensive line, not a lot of weapons, and he played pretty well last season for Cal. Now he's going to be behind a better offensive line. He's going to have better players around him. Don't be surprised if his stats really tick up. I'm not, overhyping Fernando Mendoza, but he has the potential to be very, very good. And he's teaming up with his younger brother, Alberto Mendoza, that quarterback as well, who's a backup for Indiana. That's pretty cool as well. Maybe he can teach him a thing or two, and then his younger brother could start one day. But main key is, I think Fernando Mendoza is going to be a very, very solid quarterback for Indiana this year. Then you got Lee Beebe Jr., Micah Jackson, Holden Stays, two receivers and a tight end. All are really, really good pickups. Indiana picked up some good defensive guys as well. Just the fact Indiana's ranked in a preseason top 25 poll in football is just unreal to me. I mean, I know it happened in 2021, but that, in hindsight, it doesn't feel the same as it feels here. I mean, this feels legit. Like, Indiana ranked 17th, right smack dab in the middle of the pack of the top 25. And we don't know how they're going to be. I mean, this team has the potential, from some people, to be better than last year's team. And some people think it could be worse. I think that this team could be better and still have a worse record. I think that's actually the most likely course of action. I could see Indiana almost like outperforming like their yards, just every statistic imaginable from last season. I could see them exceeding that somehow, but still going 9-3 because of the schedule. I mean, when you're playing games on the road at Iowa, at Oregon, at Penn State, you could play fantastic football and still lose those games. So, and I don't want that to happen where people are like, oh, well, Indiana dropped off and went 8-4, 9-3. If they do, and they play just as good as last year, if not better, that's a win. That is a plus. I don't see that as a negative. I know a lot of people treat it as a negative, but I don't. I would not treat it as a negative. I mean, look at this season. I mean, the only reason Indiana got in, and I'll say it, they beat Michigan, and Michigan had a very down year, but they still beat Ohio State and Alabama. So, and you look at this year, yeah, Penn State's going to be losing a lot of players. Oregon's losing a lot of players, but those teams are still going to be really good. And on the road, we know how tough it is to win on the road. Bama lost at Oklahoma and at Vanderbilt. It's tough to win on the road. Yeah, Bama's not as good, and it pains me to say that as a Bama fan, but it's true. They're not as good, but it is tough to win on the road. But I'm just so excited to see Indiana rank, and hopefully they can live up to expectations next season and just at least go 8-4, 9-3. Because if they do worse, then people are going to say it was a one-hit wonder, to fluke, and I don't want that to be the case. Just be able to prove to people Indiana's here to stay. They're going to be a really competent program, and behind Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, maybe if USC can get it together. If they're behind those programs, that's fine. That be that second tier team. I don't want Indiana in the cellar anymore. Don't be at the bottom of the Big Ten. Now that it's an 18-team Big Ten, if Indiana can just be in that second tier, that'd be great. If somehow they can keep building and breaking into the first tier permanently, that'd be amazing. Indiana's got a lot of work to do as a program, not just with Cignetti. They got a lot of infrastructure work to do. More money needs to be poured into the program, but Indiana has a lot of steps in the right direction, and I'm very excited to see what happens in the future. Then you got Florida at 18, and then also Tennessee 19, Louisville 20, Michigan 21, A&M 22, Miami 23, all the way down there. guess they're not high on Carson Beck. Boise State 24 and Ole Miss at 25. And then in the other team votes, you see Iowa there and some other Big Ten teams I don't think Indiana faces. But it's just going to be interesting to see how it all shakes out. It's a way too early poll. Doesn't mean all that much. But again, nice to see Indiana in the top 25. But for a minute, I did promise we were going to talk about Indiana basketball for a little bit. I'm saying in the future weeks, we're going to be able to throw in a little bit of Indiana basketball into Indiana at the voice of college football. And my question for this show on Indiana Hoosiers Live 15 for all of you is, when will Mike Woodson get fired? And I know that's kind of a funny question because I think a lot of people would say still, will Mike Woodson get fired? I'm kind of past that point, and I really don't like saying it because I am normally a coach. I'm normally like a viewer of basketball or a viewer of football, that when it comes to a coach, I try to give as long of a leash as possible where I just give up on him. I try not to just give up, just say the guy needs to go. But the problem is that for me, Mike Woodson, what he does have that Archie didn't is a lot more talent. But what he doesn't have that Archie Miller had is more excuses for why your performance is as bad as it is. Like Archie Miller, I gave Archie Miller, in my mind, a lot of leeway. I was like, you know what? He doesn't have a lot of talent. I mean, yeah, you got Jackson Davis. You have Morgan and Langford the 1 year. But, other than that, the rest of the team was admittedly not that great. Like Devontae Greens, the Al Durhams, Justin Smith. I love those guys. But they weren't great basketball players. They were all right. You know what I'm saying? They were okay. But now you got Mike Woodson, and it's the NIL era. And Indiana is paying a lot of money to get guys. I mean, they brought in so much talent like Tamar Bates, Mackenzie Mbako, Umar Ballo now, Khalil Ware, Jackson Davis stayed over, Jalen Hood-Schifino. So many good players on paper. And some of them perform well, like Ware did, Jackson Davis did, Schifino had the one good season, went pro. But that's where the problems lie for Mike Woodson. Mike Woodson underperforms with what he has every single season. The last season of Trace Jackson Davis, Indiana made the round of 32 and lost to Miami. Now, Miami did end up going to the Final Four. It was the last good year for Miami because they tanked after that. Jim Larrañaga just stepped down. But Indiana underperformed. That team, a lot of people felt, should have made the Sweet 16 and beyond and won the Big Ten. They finished second in the Big Ten and went to the round of 32. That was Woodson's best season. First season, Indiana, no one really knew what they were going to do. And they got back in the tournament mostly because Xavier Johnson, before his injuries, he was actually a decent player, even though he was sporadic and, got into it a lot. But, decent player. But then you look at the season after Jackson Davis last year. Indiana lost a lot. Yeah, they did. But then they brought in, Khalil Ware, Mackenzie Mbako. A lot of players that on paper were talented and should have, had success. Well, guess what? Indiana misses the tournament. A team that should have made the tournament at the very least. And then you look at this season. Indiana was picked to win the Big Ten, win the conference, right? So you bring in so many talented players. You bring in Umar Ballo, who's getting like $1.5 million a year, and he's playing well. But then you look at the backcourt, Miles Rice, Kane and Carlisle, two Pac-12 transfers along with Ballo. Rice he's done solid, but a lot of turnovers. Kane and Carlisle's been a non-factor. Outside of this last game against Ohio State, he's been an absolute non-factor, and he was a bucket getter at Stanford. Where's he been? So that's a problem. Trey Galloway's regressed. Anthony Leal, he's just a guy that on most teams would never play. But, I mean, he is, in-state guy, hometown guy at Bloomington, Indiana. Hoosier fans love Anthony Leal, but just not a guy who should be playing a lot. But he is because the backcourt's just rough. And then Mackenzie Mbaka's just tapped out. He's playing terrible after the first couple of games of the season. Malik Renew's been hurt. That's true. Woodson can use that excuse, and Woodson has used tons of injuries as an excuse in the past. But I arguably think Indiana's a better team with Renew out. Yeah, it hurts with center depth. Langdon Hatton's not great. But when Renew and Ballo are on the floor, there's no driving lanes, and the offense is just stagnant and it's clogged. And it looks like Race Thompson and Jackson Davis all over again, but a whole lot worse because Ballo is bigger. And then when you look at Renew, he's not as good as Jackson Davis. And Race Thompson, he's better than him, but Race Thompson, Jackson Davis fit better. So I don't know. And then you got Goody as well. Luke Goody's a good shooter, but this team is just way better on paper. And like, and it pains you to say it because Indiana fans don't like hearing it. But like, if Kelvin Sampson was still at IU, or even if someone like Bill Self was coaching Indiana basketball with this team, and don't even look at it as Indiana basketball. If Bill Self had these players on Kansas, they'd be doing better. I know for a fact they would be. I cannot prove it. No, I can't. But the collection of talent is just too great. Yeah, the roster assimilation's not been the best under Woodson. I don't think he knows how to assemble a roster at all. But still, even with that flaw, I think Indiana should be better than being the second team out right now of the NCAA tournament. Now, I've seen more projections have Indiana in, but still, Indiana just massively underperforming. And I think that Mike Woodson is going to get fired at the end of the season. I could be wrong. Maybe Indiana turns it around, makes a tournament, goes on a run. Yeah, there's a shot Woodson can save his job. But Mike Woodson's shown more life lately. But the only reason he is because he knows he's about to get fired. Because he was so apathetic the last year and a half. Like, no expression, no emotion. And you see him beat Ohio State, and it's like it's the Super Bowl. And it's like the Tom Allen effect all over again. Whereas Tom Allen, it was genuine. With Mike Woodson, it's like he's just out there like, yay, we won. I don't know how we did it. It was insane. And Ohio State's not even that good of a team. Yeah, it was a decent win, but we needed this from Woodson a long time ago. It's just too late. The fans they've already tapped out on Woodson. I mean, they're booing him off the court against Illinois, and that's the thing. They're getting blown out. Archie Miller, a lot of the games were competitive. I know Woodson has a better record, but it's so much more talent, though. And they've gotten blown out of so many games. Indiana is never going to get back to the national conversation in college basketball with Mike Woodson as head coach. And that's why I think he should be fired at the end of the season. I think he will get fired at the end of the season. There is a chance he gets fired earlier. Yes. Like on this next stretch, like after the Northwestern and Maryland games, Indiana's got like a 5-game stretch. It's just brutal. If they lose all those games, I could see him getting fired earlier, but I really don't. I think they're going to fire him at the end of the season because it's Mike Woodson. He played for Indiana under Bob Knight. They're going to treat him honorably. Patrick Ewing at Georgetown. They're not going to get rid of him now. And the thing is, some people still think he can save his job. That technically he can, but it is really hard to get Indiana basketball fans back on board once you lose them. And I feel like Woodson has lost them. I mean, just read Twitter. Is it fair that Indiana fans are doing that? Maybe not, but they've had 25 years of bad basketball. They want to win, and they want a coach that's going to get them there. They tried the experiment of hiring a former player. It didn't work. And do I dislike Mike Woodson? I don't. Do I want anybody fired? No. But Mike Woodson, he has to go for Indiana basketball to get anywhere. It just sucks to say that Indiana has to fire another coach, especially a former player. But Indiana's not getting anywhere. They're 14-5, and they're 5-3 in the conference. That's not bad. You'd be like, well, that's not bad. Indiana, like they can still make the tournament. Yeah, they can, but they don't look good. And that's what I think where the problems lie, especially when you're still a program as big as Indiana basketball. They need to turn it around soon, or fan apathy is going to set in. I mean, you're already seeing a lot of empty seats at Assembly Hall. That's a problem. And a lot of the fans are being attracted over to Curt Cignetti and Indiana football. You want to get the basketball fans back, you got to get a good coach. Get a Chris Beard, get anybody at this point that has experience. And that's, I mean, even if you throw the money at Bruce Pearl, I know a lot of people don't like him, but if you give it to Bruce Pearl, if he would want the job, because he said tons of times that he loves Indiana, but I don't think he'd take it anymore. That ship sailed. You lost Dusty May. He's not coming now that he's at Michigan. You'd have to get a lot of money. Nate Oates, he's out of reach. Chris Beard's possible at Ole Miss, but really, I mean, Indiana had a better shot last year to get rid of Woodson, and they kept him. I understand, one season not making the tournament, but it might have been better if Indiana got rid of him last year. But now it's going to be interesting. Not as many great candidates on the horizon, but Indiana basketball's just going nowhere fast. And even though Indiana fans have completely turned on Woodson, I still am going to be rooting for Indiana basketball to win this season. I hope they do. I'd rather them win. And if Woodson keeps his job, he keeps his job. If they win and make the tournament, go on a deep run, whatever, I'll be happy. I can't root for IU to lose. I can understand why a lot of people would want them to lose to get rid of Woodson, but I wouldn't. I'm just not going to do that. But I think Mike Woodson will get fired at the end of the season, but only time will tell. If they miss the tournament, he's gone. And if they barely make the tournament, losing the first round, there's still a good chance he's going to be gone. That is definitely my opinion on that. They definitely just have not looked that good. Appreciate everybody for being here. Definitely going to read your comments real quick before I get out of here. Jeff says, I'm here tonight. Appreciate that, Jeff. Jeff says, I think the Cignetti is the best coach in Indiana's first time being IU making the CFP. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I want to say he's number one. He basically is in my book. But, going off the entire history, you still got to give credit to Mallory and Bo McMillan. But if Cignetti can do it a few more years at IU and do really well, he definitely will be the number one coach for sure. Jeff said they should be ranked for the only two teams that they lost is the ones championship. Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. Manny C says Cignetti pointed out earlier this week that Indiana lost to two teams in the national championship. Absolutely. That should really make their case look better. Jackson says, what's up, Hoosier Nation? Appreciate that, Jackson. Jeff says Mike Woodson needs to get coaching right or he's gone, in my opinion. Absolutely. He's done a terrible job with scheming, roster construction, a lot of problems. If he doesn't get it fixed soon, he is gone for sure. Darrell MVP, appreciate you for stopping by. Says Indiana versus Maryland's a key game for Mike Woodson. Both are bubble teams. Absolutely. Really, the Northwestern game is too. Northwestern and the Maryland game. Because if you lose those games, then Woodson's done because they got Michigan State coming up, Purdue twice. I mean, it's going to be a bloodbath. It's going to be ugly. If Indiana does not win the next two games, I think Mike Woodson is gone. That is my opinion. Jack says maybe Indiana could get Scott Drew. I don't think he's leaving. If Scott Drew didn't leave for Kentucky, he's not leaving for Indiana. He's staying at Baylor. He's got a great gig down there. I would love that, though. That would be awesome, and I would 110% endorse that. Not going to happen, but it would be great. You can dream. Jack says, let's get Indiana, the voice of college football, 1,000 subs. You can also find me as well on the Alabama Call-In Show every Thursday night with Jackson. That's always a blast. And you can find me on my YouTube channel, Only Talk Sports, where I talk sports every single day, or at least I try to. Definitely go check that out if you haven't. Would definitely appreciate it. And my X account as well. Everybody's calling it X now, I guess. I still prefer Twitter, but check out my X account as well. And also, definitely appreciate, again, you guys for being here. Subscribe to Indiana, the voice of college football. Like Jackson said, get it to 1,000 subs. We're definitely going to get there. It's Curt Cignetti. He's been building up Indiana football, trying to build up this channel, and definitely appreciate your guys' support. And go Hoosiers, like always. Go IU football for next season, and go Indiana basketball. Rains, shine, snow, whatever you want to call it. It's been a lot of cloudy days with Mike Woodson at the helm of Indiana basketball, but hopefully Indiana basketball can go on a run and start winning some games, even though I doubt it. But definitely, again, appreciate everybody for being here. And go Hoosiers.